Margaret believed she had done everything right. The mother of 2 daughters prided herself on keeping a clean house and a stable family, though stability often felt like a balancing act. Her youngest, Violet, was the light of her life, bright, curious, and always asking questions. Her eldest, Irene, was quiet and self-contained, often retreating into herself in a way that Margaret couldn't quite reach. They lived in a small, sun-bleached house at the edge of town, where the only noise came from the wind sweeping across the fields and the occasional rattle of the train a few miles away. Margaret's husband, Arthur, had been gone for years, not dead, just gone. She had raised the girls alone, managing to scrape by on her wages from the textile factory. What set Margaret apart, though, was her unshakable conviction that she needed to protect her daughters from the world, even if that meant making them fear her a little.
The world doesn't care about you. It'll chew you up and spit you out if you're not careful. Better you learn that now,
she would tell them. Margaret wasn't cruel, but she wasn't tender either. She held her daughters to high standards, and when they fell short, she meted out her disappointment like clockwork, a harsh word here, a silent dinner there. She believed it was her duty to toughen them up. Violet, however, didn't seem to harden. Despite Margaret's best efforts, her youngest daughter remained open to the world. She sang while she worked, spun stories at the dinner table, and dreamed of leaving their small town to become an artist. Her glow irritated Margaret, who saw it as a liability. She'd learned the hard way that hope was dangerous. Irene, on the other hand, was her success story. She'd learned to keep her head down, work hard, and expect little. Margaret could breathe easier knowing Irene would survive. But then came the letter. One morning, while Violet and Irene were at school, Margaret found an envelope on the kitchen table. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat but firm. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling. It was from Arthur. The letter was short and vague, but it said enough. He wanted to see his daughters. After all these years, he claimed to have turned his life around and wanted to make amends. Margaret's stomach churned. She'd worked so hard to build a life without him, to shield her daughters from his failures. Letting him back in felt like undoing all of that. Margaret burned the letter in the sink and told herself it was for the best. But Arthur didn't stop at the letter. A week later, he showed up. It was a Saturday afternoon when Arthur appeared at their front door, his figure slouched but recognizable. Violet's face lit up with curiosity, Irene's froze in confusion. Margaret's hands gripped the dish rag tightly as Arthur explained himself, his voice soft and full of practiced regret.
I just want a chance to know my girls. Please, Maggie.
Margaret's instinct was to send him away, but Violet intervened.
Mom, please, just let him stay for a little while.
Margaret reluctantly agreed, though her eyes never left Arthur. She didn't trust his words, his gestures, or his sudden need to reconcile. But Violet, ever hopeful, threw herself into getting to know her father. In the weeks that followed, the household shifted. Violet and Arthur spent hours talking and laughing, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Irene watched from the sidelines, her quiet resentment simmering. Margaret's skepticism deepened as Arthur began making promises he couldn't possibly keep, a new house, trips to the city, a brighter future. Then, one evening, Margaret overheard Violet and Arthur talking in the living room.
Why did you leave?
Violet asked, her voice small but steady. Arthur hesitated.
I wasn't ready for the responsibility. But I've changed now.
Margaret couldn't stay silent. She stormed into the room, her voice sharp.
Changed? You think a few years and a couple of sweet words make up for what you did?
I'm trying, Maggie. Isn't that worth something?
Not to me. And it shouldn't be to them.
The next day, Margaret found Violet packing a bag.
What are you doing?
I'm leaving. I'm going with Dad. He said he'd take me to the city so I can start my art career.
Margaret's heart sank.
You don't know what you're doing. He'll disappoint you, just like he did before.
Maybe. But I need to find out for myself.
Violet replied, her eyes brimming with tears. And just like that, Violet was gone. Months passed, and Margaret's house felt emptier than ever. Irene grew even quieter, her resentment toward Violet and Arthur festering in the silence. Margaret tried to carry on, but the weight of Violet's absence was unbearable. Then, one day, a letter arrived. This time, it was from Violet. She wrote of the city, of the art classes she'd started, and of the ways Arthur had let her down, how he'd disappeared again after only a few weeks. But she didn't regret leaving.
You were right about him, Mom. But you were wrong about the world. It isn't all bad. I'm finding my way, and I'm stronger because of you.
Margaret read the letter over and over, her heart aching with a bittersweet mix of pride and loss. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her love, though tough and imperfect, had been enough. That evening, Margaret found Irene sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. Margaret hesitated, then joined her, the wooden steps creaking beneath her weight. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Irene broke the silence.
I hope Violet's okay.
She murmured, her voice almost too soft to hear. Margaret nodded.
She's stronger than we think.
Irene turned to her, her stoic expression softening.
So are you, Mom. You did everything you could for us. And, even if I don't say it often, I love you for it.
Margaret felt tears well in her eyes as she reached out to place a hand on Irene's. They sat together in the quiet dusk, two women bound by love, loss, and the hope that their family, though fractured, might someday heal.